Today's patron shoutout goes to Amy. Thanks Amy for supporting me through Patreon. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game has Matt, Max, and Arja joining me, with Mathieu playing his Doric deck, keeping 2 forests, Search for Tomorrow, Soul Ring, Omnath Locus of Mana, Emrakul the Promised End, and Kenris Transformation. Arja is playing his Malcolm and Francisco Pirate deck, keeping Swamp, Island, Winged Words, Deadeye Tracker, Greedy Freebooter, Stormfleet Navigator, and a Siren Stormtamer. I have borrowed Max's Gonti Canny Inquisitor deck, keeping a Tangled Floridhedron, Witch King of Angmar, Snow-Covered Island, Yavimaya Dryad, Botanical Sanctum, Exotic Orchard, and a Carpet of Flowers. Last but not least, looking to get swole for the summer, Max is playing his Rakdos the Muscle deck, keeping Lotus Ring, Greater Gargadon, Fleshbag Marauder, Kethik, Crucible Goliath, Swamp, Hostile Hostel, and a Spine Rock Knoll. I win the die roll and start us off. Before we get into today's game, I want to talk about the sponsors for my channel. Card Conduit is the best way to sell your unused Magic cards. Whether you've got a box of unsorted bulk, or a complete and alphabetized set, there's a great option for everyone. With a payout averaging 19% better than using any one buy list, and that's after fees are applied, you can rest assured you'll get the best bang for your buck. If you're a skeptic like me, their easy customer service and detailed reports make the whole interaction transparent and safe. And if you use the affiliate link in the description below, or the promo code MTGMUDSTA, you'll save 10% off their fees. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. Not to mention an easy-to-use and great online buy list. And if you use the promo code MTGMUDSTA, your first purchase of MTG Sealed and Singles will be 5% off. And Dragon Shield, the strongest sleeves for your strongest deck. So be sure to use the code MUDSTA or the affiliate link down below to save 5% on your next order. I play Botanical Sanctum and pay 1 green for a Carpet of Flowers. With no fear, Arja plays an island for turn and casts a Siren Stormtamer. Max just plays a Spine Rock Knoll tapped and hides away a card. Mathieu plays a forest and then pays 1 green to suspend Search from Tomorrow. I draw for turn and get a mana from my Carpet of Flowers. I then use it to cast the Tangled Floridhedron and pass to Arja. Arja draws and plays a Swamp. He then plays Francisco and goes to combat. He swings the Stormtamer at me for 1 and gets to explore. This has Arja putting Reconnaissance Mission to his graveyard and putting a +1/+1 counter onto his commander and passing. Max draws and plays a Swamp. He just casts Felwar Stone and passes after that. Mathieu takes down the Search for Tomorrow, then draws for turn. He plays a forest and casts his Soul Ring. He then has enough for Omnath and passes after that. I draw and play an Exotic Orchard. I then pay 3 for a Yavimaya Dryad and go and find an Overgrown Tomb to put into play and pass after that. Arja draws and plays an island. He then casts Malcolm and goes to combat. He swings the Stormtamer at Max, and Francisco goes at Mathieu, with them both taking 1. Arja then gets to make 2 treasures, explores twice, and reveals 2 non-land cards, but keeps Dig Through Time on top. He then casts a Greedy Freebooter, and passes after that. Max plays a Smoldering Marsh, and then casts Lotus Ring, and passes. Mathieu gets to cast his Search for Tomorrow on his upkeep, going to find a forest and drawing. He then plays another forest, and then casts Kenris Transformation and targets Francisco. Arja responds, sacrificing and countering it with a Stormtamer. Mathieu then casts Doric, and goes to find another forest and passes. I just draw, play a Cold-Eyed Selkie, and pass to Arja. Arja's got a tapped Creeping Tar Pit for turn, and he goes to combat. He swings Malcolm at me, Francisco at Mathieu, and the Freebooter at Max. We all take the hits, with Arja making 3 treasures, and then gets to explore. He bins 2 cards and draws a land. Post-combat, he then plays Talisman of Dominance and passes to Max. Max has a Swamp for turn, and then taps enough for Rakdos and passes. Matt draws and goes straight to combat. he swings Doric at Arja and pays the 2 to transform her. Arja then takes 6, and after combat, Mathieu floats 4 mana on Omnath, using 2 of it to then help cast Ghalta. He passes once the dinosaur resolves. I draw and play a Polluted Delta, cracking it and losing 1 to find a tropical island, thus making my deck CDH. I then cast Gonti and go to combat. I swing the Dryad at Mathieu and the Cold-Eyed Selkie at Arja. Neither of them block, so I draw a card off the Selkie and then exile the top card of each of their libraries. After that, I pass, and Arja casts Dig Through Time on my end step. Arja draws and plays a Swamp while Mathieu and I compare the size of our Omnaths. He then goes to combat, and after making some deals, Arja decides to swing Francisco at me after agreeing to not get attacked by Mathieu and Max's big creatures. The Freebooter then goes at Max, and Malcolm goes at Matt. I attempt to slaughter Pact Malcolm, but Arja responds with a negate. No one blocks everything, so they all take their damage, with Arja making 3 treasures again and exploring 3 times, hitting non-land cards and putting them to the yard. After combat, Arja exiles the rest of his graveyard to help cast Treasure Cruise. After drawing his 3, he casts a Ruin Raider, and then a Stormfleet Navigator. He then moves to his end step, losing 3 off the Ruin Raider as he reveals Ashiok and puts them to hand. Max draws and plays a Hostile Hostel. He casts a Fleshbag Marauder, which as it comes in, has everyone sacrifice a creature. This gets Max a Rakdos trigger, and he exiles the top 3 cards of Arja's library, and then casts Departed Deckhand from among them. Max then wraps things up by suspending a Greater Gargadon, and passes to Matt. Matt transforms Doric back, and then draws for turn. In his main phase, he casts Old Gnawbone, and goes to combat. He swings Ghalta at Max, and Max blocks with Rakdos, and then sacrifices the Departed Deckhand to give Rakdos indestructible. Max also gets a Rakdos trigger, exiling Mathieu's top 2, but Mathieu still tramples over for 7, and makes 7 treasure tokens. In his post-combat main phase, he then casts Anara, and passes to me. I draw and cast Hostage Taker, which as it comes in, exiles Old Gnawbone. I then play a Forest that I'd exiled from Mathieu, and go to combat. I swing the Cold-Eyed Selkie at Arja again, and the Yavimaya Dryad goes at Mathieu. Neither of them can walk because of Island and Forest walking respectively, so they take their hits, and I exile their top cards from each of them, and draw a card from the Selkie. I then pass to Arja. Arja draws and plays a Drownyard Temple. He then casts Ashiok, and down takes it to exile our graveyards, and mills himself for 4. Going to combat, he swings Francisco at Mathieu, Malcolm at me, and the Ruin Raider at Max. We all take our hits, with Arja exploring 3 lands to his hand, and makes 3 treasure tokens. He then casts a Necropolis Regent after combat, and as he moves to his end step, reveals a Moth Dust Changeling to the Ruin Raider, and passes. Max ticks down Greater Gargoth, and draws for turn. He then casts Rakdos, Patron of Chaos, and passes. He chooses me with Rakdos' trigger, and I decide to let Max draw 2, and we then pass the turn. Matt draws and goes to combat. He swings out at Arja, transforming Doric as he attacks to give his other creatures +2/+2. Arja blocks Doric with the Stormfleet Navigator, and Anara with the Necropolis Regent. Anara and the Regent trade, while Arja soaks up some damage with the Navigator, but still takes the rest. In his post-combat main phase, Mathieu then plays Return of the Wildspeaker, drawing 14 off of Ghalta. One of which is a Beast Within, which he uses to take out the Hostage Taker and get back his Old Gnawbone. Mathieu then follows up with a Forest, and plays out Burgeoning. He then passes, discarding down to 7. I've got a Forest for turn, and Mathieu puts an Adventurer's Guildhall into play. I then cast Witch King of Angmar, and go to combat, and continue my attacks, swinging the Selkie at Arja and the Dryad at Mathieu. With them connecting, I draw a card, and exile the top card from each of them, and with nothing else, just pass. Arja draws and downticks Ashiok again, milling himself for 4, and exiling all of his opponent's graveyards. Arja mills a Lord of Change notably, which he then reanimates with the Dread Return. As it comes in, he gets to draw 3. He then casts Buried Alive, and goes into his library, finding Hostage Taker, Duskmangler, and a Direfleet Ravager. Arja then sacrifices 3 creatures to flashback Dread Return, and reanimates the Duskmangler. We each sacrifice a creature, lose 4 life, and discard a card. And Max gets a Rakdos trigger, exiling the top 6 cards of my library since he sacrificed a creature. Arja then goes to combat. He swings Francisco at Mathieu, jumping up to just almost lethal with 20 commander damage. Arja then explores a swamp to his hand, and discards down to hand size, passing to Max. Max ticks down his Gargadon and draws for turn. He then plays a forest from among the exiled cards, and Mathieu also puts a forest into play with Burgeoning. Max then casts my Shardless Agent, and he gets a Cascade trigger, revealing until he hits Goblin Bombardment. With nothing else, he passes. Mathieu draws and casts Rishkar's Expertise, but with the spell in the stack, Max responds, casting Hurl Through Hell and targeting Ghalta. This has Mathieu only drawing 7 instead of 12 thankfully, and he then puts Baru into play. Matt then continues by casting Azusa, and plays out 3 forests, which gives his creatures +3/+3 and trample. Going to combat, he swings Old Gnawbone at me, and I block with the Witch King. And before damage, sacrifice the Cold-Eyed Selkie to make it indestructible. Old Gnawbone still tramples over for 7, but he has to sacrifice it to the Witch King at least, and Matt also gets to make 7 treasures. After combat, he casts Nature's Claim on his own Burgeoning, gaining some life. Once his Burgeoning's destroyed, he then casts Emrakul the Promised End, and takes Arja's next turn, plus gives him an extra turn after that. Mathieu then passes turn. I draw and cast a Splingbroom Druid, sacrificing a land to go and find 2 basics. I then cast a Skyway Robber, and pass to Arja. Arja draws as Mathieu takes his turn. Mathieu then makes a deal with Arja where he won't run Arja's creatures into Emrakul if Arja doesn't attack him on his extra turn. Arja's not in a position to negotiate, and agrees. Mathieu continues the turn by casting Winged Words, making sure Arja takes a damage from the Talisman. He then goes to combat, and swings Francisco and the Duskmangler at me, and the Lord of Change and Malcolm at Max. I block the Duskmangler with the Skyway Robber, and Max blocks Malcolm with Rakdos, but we take the rest. Arja has to sacrifice Francisco to the Witch King trigger, but does still get a treasure, and an Explore trigger. Mathieu then continues Arja's turn by downticking Ashiok, and targets Max to mill, and then exiles all of his opponent's graveyards. Arja draws and takes his own turn. He casts Biden of Thassa, and downticks Ashiok on himself. And after milling himself, animates the Creeping Tar Pit, and goes to combat. He swings it and the Lord of Change at Max, and Max blocks the Lord of Change with Rakdos. Before damage, Max sacrifices the Shardless Agent to make it indestructible, and this gives him a Rakdos trigger. He exiles Mathieu's top 3, and damage is then dealt, and Arja passes. Max downticks the Gargadon and draws. He then plays one of Mathieu's forests from exile, and casts a Nightmare Shepherd. And then Kroaxa. He gets the Kroaxa trigger, with Arja being the only one to discard a land card, taking 3. Kroaxa is then sacrificed, and the Nightmare Shepherd brings it back, making us all do it again. Max also gets to exile the top 6 cards from Arja first though, and we all then discard a non-land card. Max then continues by casting Kitesail Freebooter from Arja's cards, and chooses Mathieu with it, but unfortunately whiffs. With nothing else, Max passes. Mathieu draws and plays a forest, pumping his team with Baru. He then plays a Myriad Landscape. He recasts Doric, but can't search for a forest card because of Ashiok. He then casts Renata, and goes to combat. He swings Baru at Arja, and Max responds by sacrificing the Kitesail Freebooter to Goblin Bombardment to deal damage to Mathieu before he kills Arja. The Nightmare Shepherd makes a copy of the Freebooter, which as it comes in targets me. And with that trigger on the stack, I used Assassin's Trophy to take out the Nightmare Shepherd. Max then responds by sacrificing the Shepherd to the Goblin Bombardment and pings Methieu for another 1, plus gets to exile the top 6 cards of Methieu's library with Rakdos. Everything then resolves, and Arja dies, and Methieu passes. I draw and cast God Eternal Ronus, and go to combat. I swing the Witch King at Methieu, and Gonti at Max. Max chumps with the Freebooter copy, and sacrifices it before damage to Goblin Bombardment, exiling my top 2, and dealing 1 to me. Methieu then dies to the Witch King, and I cast Sword of Feast and Famine in my second main phase, as I pass to Max. Max draws and plays Shizo. He then casts a Shatterskull Smashing for 3, and targets the Witch King. I sacrifice my Spling Brood Druid to make it indestructible, but unfortunately have to tap him. With no flying blockers on my side, Max is able to swing with Rakdos, and take me out, and win the game.
Game review time. This game was 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 13 seconds, and as you can see, I am once again in front of the camera. We're trying something new, so let's see how this goes. Today's game was pretty sweet, and we had some brand new commanders, which is kind of subjective depending on when you're watching this video, and also with the release schedule that things seem to be coming out at. We had 2 new commanders, Gonti, which I was playing, and I think I prefer Felix 5 Boots to it. Not to say that Max didn't do a good job building the deck, I just didn't really get to do much other than cast a Cold-Eyed Selkie and that Yavimaya Druid, and hit for 1 or 2 points of damage. Max's Rakdos deck, however, was pretty sweet, and he got to play that really fun card, Lotus Ring. I am really excited to try it out. I think it's particularly powerful, and I'm just waiting to see it get really broken. That being said, Rakdos itself was actually really good, and that sacrifice ability where he gets to steal cards was fantastic. Arja's Francisco and Malcolm deck was really good, and we've seen it a couple times on the channel at this point. It's very low to the ground, meaning that it has a lot of low-costing creatures, and he starts connecting and getting to filter through his deck, plus gain a bunch of treasures. This means he's able to power out stuff earlier on, although it seemed like all he was really drawing this game was his low-costing pirates. Methieu playing Doric was also a lot of fun to see. I love monocolored decks, and I love the Dungeons & Dragons movie, so being able to see the commander from it from the Secret Lair in action was pretty sweet. The fact that she transforms into an owlbear was even better, and it was surprisingly dangerous. I think that there was a sub-theme of legendary matters in mono green, which was fun, and it kind of had more of a, theme to it.
This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.